Section 11 of The Princess and Curdie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lizzie Driver. The Princess and Curdie by George MacDonald. Chapters 17 to 18. Chapter 17. The Wine Cellar. He lighted his candle and examined it. Decayed and broken as it was strongly secured in its place by hinges on one side, and either lock or bolt, he could not tell which, on the other. A brief use of his pocket-knife was enough to make room for his hand and arm to get through, and then he found a great iron bolt, but so rusty that he could not move it. Lena whimpered. He took his knife again, made the hole bigger, and stood back. In she shot her small head and long neck, seized the bolt with her teeth, and dragged it, grating and complaining, back. A push then opened the door. It was at the foot of a short flight of steps. They ascended, and at the top Curdie found himself in a space which, from the echo of his stamp, appeared of some size, though of what sort he could not at first tell, for his hands, feeling about, came upon nothing. Presently, however, they fell on a great thing. It was a wine cask. He was just setting out to explore the place thoroughly, when he heard steps coming down a stair. He stood still, not knowing whether the door would open an inch from his nose, or 20 yards behind his back. It did neither. He heard the key turn in the lock, and a stream of light shot in, ruining the darkness, about 15 yards away on his right. A man carrying a candle in one hand and a large silver flagon in the other entered and came toward him. The light revealed a row of huge wine casks that stretched away into the darkness of the other end of the long vault. Curdie retreated into the recess of the stair, and peeping round the corner of it, watched him, thinking what he could do to prevent him from locking them in. He came on and on, until Curdie feared he would pass the recess and see them. He was just preparing to rush out, and master him before he should give alarm, not in the least knowing what he should do next, when, to his relief, the man stopped at the third cask from where he stood. He set down his light, and on top of it removed what seemed a large vent peg, and poured into the cask a quantity of something from the flagon. Then he turned to the next cask, drew some wine, rinsed the flagon, threw the wine away, drew and rinsed and threw away again, then drew and drank, draining to the bottom. Last of all he filled the flagon from the cask he had first visited, replaced the vent peg, took up his candle, and turned towards the door. "There is something wrong here," thought Curdie. "Speak to him, Lena," he whispered. The sudden howl she gave made Curdie himself start and tremble for a moment. As to the man, he answered Lena's with another horrible howl, forced from him by the convulsive shudder of every muscle of his body, then reeled, gasping to and fro, and dropped his candle. But just as Curdie expected to see him fall dead, he recovered himself, and flew to the door, through which he darted, leaving it open behind him. The moment he ran, Curdie stepped out, picked up the candle still alight, sped after him to the door, drew out the key, and then returned to the stair and waited. In a few minutes he heard the sound of many feet and voices. Instantly he turned the tap of the cask from which the man had been drinking, set the candle beside it on the floor, went down the steps, and out of the little door, followed by Lena, and closed it behind them. Through the hole in it he could see a little and hear all. He could see how the light of many candles filled the place, and could hear how some 24 feet ran hither and thither through the echoing cellar. He could hear the clash of iron, probably spits and pokers, now and then, and at last heard how, finding nothing remarkable except the best wine running to waste, they all turned on the butler, and accused him of having fooled them with a drunken dream. He did his best to defend himself, appealing to the evidence of their own senses, that he was as sober as they were. They replied that a fright was no less a fright that the cause was imaginary, and a dream no less a dream that the fright had waked him from. When he discovered, and triumphantly adduced as corroboration, that the key was gone from the door, they said it merely showed how drunk he had been, either that, or how frightened, for he had certainly dropped it. In vain he protested that he had never taken it out of the lock, that he never did when he went in, and certainly had not this time stopped to do so when he came out. They asked him why he had to go to the cellar at such a time of the day, and said it was because he had already drunk all the wine that was left from dinner. He said if he had dropped the key was to be found, and they must help him to find it. They told him they wouldn't move a peg for him. He declared, with much language, he would have them all turned out of the king's service. They said they would swear he was drunk. And so positive were they about it, that at last the butler himself began to think whether it was possible they could be in the right. For he knew that sometimes, when he had been drunk, he fancied things had taken place which he found afterward could not have happened. Certain of his fellow servants, however, had all the time a doubt whether the cellar goblin had not appeared to him, or at least ordered him to protect the wine. In any case, nobody wanted to find the key for him. Nothing could please them better than that the door of the wine cellar should never more be locked. By degrees the hubbub died away, and they departed, not even pulling to the door, for there was neither handle nor latch to it. As soon as they were gone, Curdie returned, knowing now that they were in the wine cellar of the palace, as indeed he had suspected. Finding a pool of wine in a hollow of the floor, Lina lapped it up eagerly. She had had no breakfast, and was now very thirsty as well as hungry. Her master was in a similar plight, for he had but just begun to eat when the magistrate arrived with the soldiers. If only they were all in bed, he thought, that he might find his way to the larder. For he said to himself that, as he was sent there by the young princess's great-great-grandmother to serve her or her father in some way, surely he must have a right to his food in the palace, without which he could do nothing. He would at once go and reconnoitre. So he crept up the stair that led from the cellar. At the top was a door opening on a long passage dimly lighted by a lamp. He told Lina to lie down upon the stair while he went on. At the end of the passage he found a door ajar, and peering through saw right into a great stone hall, where a huge fire was blazing, and through which men in the king's livery were constantly coming and going. Some also in the same livery were lounging about the fire. He noted that their colours were the same as those he himself, as king's miner, wore, but from what he had seen and heard of the habits of the place, he could not hope they would treat him the better for that. The one interesting thing at that moment, however, was the plentiful supper with which the table was spread. It was something at least to stand in sight of food, and he was unwilling to turn his back on the prospect so long as a share in it was not absolutely hopeless. Peeping thus, he soon made up his mind that if at any moment the hall should be empty, he would at that moment rush in and attempt to carry off a dish. That he might lose no time by indecision, he selected a large pie upon which to pounce instantaneously. But after he had watched for some minutes, it did not seem at all likely the chance would arrive before supper time, and he was just about to turn away and rejoin Lina, when he saw that there was not a person in the place. Curdie never made up his mind, and then hesitated. He darted in, seized the pie, and bore it swiftly and noiselessly to the cellar stair. Chapter 18. The King's Kitchen. Back to the cellar Curdie and Lina sped with their booty, where, seated on the steps, Curdie lighted a bit of his candle for a moment. A very little bit it was now, but they did not waste much of it in an examination of the pie. That they effected by a more summary process. Curdie thought it the nicest food he had ever tasted, and between them they soon ate it up. Then Curdie would have thrown the dish along with the bones into the water, that there might be no traces of them. But he thought of his mother, and hid it instead, and the very next minute they wanted it to draw some wine into. He was careful it should be from the cask of which he had seen the butler drink. Then they sat down again upon the steps, and waited until the house should be quiet. For he was there to do something, and if it did not come to him in the cellar, he must go to meet it in other places. Therefore, lest he should fall asleep, he set the end of the helve of his mattock on the ground, and seated himself on the cross-part, leaning against the wall, so that as long as he kept awake he should rest, but the moment he began to fall asleep he must fall awake instead. He quite expected some of the servants would visit the cellar again that night, but whether it was that they were afraid of each other, or believed more of the butler's story than they had chosen to allow, not one of them appeared. When at length he thought he must venture, he shouldered his mattock and crept up the stair. The lamp was out in the passage, but he could not miss his way to the servants' hall. Trusting to Lina's quickness in concealing herself, he took her with him. When they reached the hall they found it quiet and nearly dark. The last of the great fire was glowing red, but giving little light. Curdie stood and warmed himself for a few moments. Miner as he was, he had found the cellar cold to sit in doing nothing, and standing thus, he thought of looking if there were any bits of candle about. There were many candlesticks on the supper table, but to his disappointment and indignation, their candles seemed to have been all left to burn out, and some of them indeed he found still hot in the neck. Presently, one after another, he came upon 7 men fast asleep, most of them upon tables, one in a chair, and one on the floor. They seemed, from their shape and colour, to have eaten and drunk so much that they might have been burned alive without waking. He grasped the hand of each in succession, and found 2 ox hoofs, 3 pig hoofs, one concerning which he could not be sure whether it was the hoof of a donkey or a pony, and 1 dog's paw. "A nice set of people to be about a king," thought Curdie to himself, and turned again to his candle hunt. He did at last find 2 or 3 little pieces, and stowed them away in his pockets. They now left the hall by another door, and entered a short passage, which led them to a huge kitchen vaulted and black with smoke. There too the fire was still burning, so that he was able to see a little of the state of things in this quarter also. The place was dirty and disorderly. In a recess, on a heap of brushwood, lay a kitchen maid, with a table cover around her, and a skillet in her hand. Evidently she too had been drinking. In another corner lay a page, and Curdie noted how like his dress was to his own. In the cinders before the hearth were huddled 3 dogs and 5 cats, all fast asleep, while the rats were running about the floor. Curdie's heart ached to think of the lovely child princess living over such a sty. The mine was a paradise to a palace with such servants in it. Leaving the kitchen, he got into the region of the sculleries. There horrible smells were wandering about, like evil spirits that came forth with the darkness. He lighted a candle, but only to see ugly sights. Everywhere was filth and disorder. Mangy turnspit dogs were lying about, and grey rats were gnawing at refuse in the sinks. It was like a hideous dream. He felt as if he should never get out of it, and longed for one glimpse of his mother's poor little kitchen, so clean and bright and airy. Turning from it at last in miserable disgust, he almost ran back through the kitchen, re-entered the hall, and crossed it to another door. It opened upon a winder passage leading to an arch in a stately corridor, all its length lighted by lamps in niches. At the end of it was a large and beautiful hall, with great pillars. There sat 3 men in the royal livery, fast asleep, each in a great armchair, with his feet on a huge footstool. They looked like fools dreaming themselves kings, and Leela looked as if she longed to throttle them. At one side of the hall was the grand staircase, and they went up. Everything that now met Curdie's eyes was rich, not glorious like the splendours of the mountain cavern, but rich and soft, except where, now and then, some rough old rib of the ancient fortress came through, hard and discoloured. Now some dark bare arch of stone, now some rugged and blackened pillar, now some huge beam, brown with the smoke and dust of centuries, looked like a thistle in the midst of daisies, or a rock in a smooth lawn. They wandered about a good while, again and again finding themselves where they had been before. Gradually, however, Curdie was gaining some idea of the place. By and by Lena began to look frightened, and as they went on, Curdie saw that she looked more and more frightened. Now, by this time, he had come to understand that what made her look frightened was always the fear of frightening, and therefore he concluded they must be drawing nigh to somebody. At last, in a gorgeously painted gallery, he saw a curtain of crimson, and on the curtain a royal crown wrought in silks and stones. He felt sure this must be the king's chamber, and it was here he was wanted, or, if it was not the place he was bound for, something would meet him and turn him aside, for he had come to think that so long as a man wants to do right, he may go where he can. When he can go no farther, then it is not the way. "Only," said his father, in assenting to the theory, "he must really want to do right, and not merely fancy he does. He must want it with his heart and will, and not his rag of a tongue." So he gently lifted the corner of the curtain, and there behind it was a half-open door. He entered, and the moment he was in, Lena stretched herself along the threshold between the curtain and the door. Section 11. The Princess and Curdie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lizzie Driver. The Princess and Curdie by George MacDonald. Chapter 19. The King's Chamber. He found himself in a large room dimly lighted by a silver lamp that hung from the ceiling. Far at the other end was a great bed, surrounded with dark, heavy curtains. He went softly toward it, his heart beating fast. It was a dreadful thing to be alone in the king's chamber at the dead of night. To gain courage he had to remind himself of the beautiful princess who had sent him. But when he was about halfway to the bed, a figure appeared from the farther side of it, and came towards him, with a hand raised warningly. He stood still. The light was dim, and he could distinguish little more than the outline of a young girl. But though the form he saw was much taller than the princess he remembered, he never doubted it was she. For one thing, he knew that most girls would have been frightened to see him there in the dead of the night, but, like a true princess, and the princess he used to know, she walked straight on to meet him. As she came she lowered the hand she had lifted, and laid the forefinger of it upon her lips. Nearer and nearer, quite near, close up to him she came, then stopped and stood a moment looking at him. "You are Curdie," she said. "And you are the Princess Irene," he returned. "Then we know each other still," she said, with a sad smile of pleasure. "You will help me." "That I will," answered Curdie. He did not say, "if I can," for he knew that what he was sent to do, that he could do. "May I kiss your hand, little princess?" She was only between 9 and 10, though indeed she looked several years older, and her eyes almost those of a grown woman, for she had had terrible trouble of late. She held out her hand. "I am not the little princess any more. I have grown up since I saw you last, Mr. Miner." The smile which accompanied the words had in it a strange mixture of playfulness and sadness. "So I see, Miss Princess," returned Curdie, "and therefore, being more of a princess, you are the more my princess. Here I am, sent by your great-great-grandmother to be your servant. May I ask why you are up so late, princess?" "Because my father wakes so frightened, and I don't know what he would do if he didn't find me by his bedside. There! He's waking now." She darted off to the side of the bed she had come from. Curdie stood where he was. A voice, altogether unlike what he remembered of the mighty, noble king on his white horse, came from the bed, thin, feeble, hollow, and husky, and in tone like that of a petulant child. "I will not! I will not! I am a king, and I will be a king. I hate you and despise you, and you shall not torture me." "Never mind them, father dear," said the princess. "I am here, and they shan't touch you. They dare not, you know, so long as you defy them." "They want my crown, darling, and I can't give them my crown, can I? For what is a king without his crown?" "They shall never have your crown, my king," said Irene. "Here it is, all safe. I am watching it for you." Curdie drew near the bed on the other side. There lay the grand old king. He looked grand still, and 20 years older. His body was pillowed high, his beard descended long and white over the crimson coverlid, and his crown, its diamonds and emeralds gleaming in the twilight of the curtains, lay in front of him, his long thin old hands folded round it, and the ends of his beard straying among the lovely stones. His face was like that of a man who had died fighting nobly, but one thing made it dreadful. His eyes, while they moved about as if searching in this direction and in that, looked more dead than his face. He saw neither his daughter nor his crown. It was the voice of the one and the touch of the other that comforted him. He kept murmuring what seemed words, but was unintelligible to Curdie, although, to judge from the look of Irene's face, she learned and concluded from it. By degrees his voice sank away, and the murmuring ceased, although still his lips moved. Thus lay the old king on his bed, slumbering with his crown between his hands. On one side of him stood a lovely little maiden, with blue eyes, and brown hair going a little back from her temples, as if blown by a wind that no one felt but herself, and on the other a stalwart young miner, with his mattock over his shoulder. Stranger sight still was Lena lying along the threshold, only nobody saw her just then. A moment more and the king's lips ceased to move. His breathing had grown regular and quiet. The princess gave a sigh of relief and came round to Curdie. "We can talk a little now," she said, leading him toward the middle of the room. "My father will sleep now till the doctor wakes him to give him his medicine. It is not really medicine though, but wine. Nothing but that, the doctor says, could have kept him alive so long. He always comes in the middle of the night to give it him with his own hands, but it makes me cry to see him wake up when so nicely asleep." "What sort of man is your doctor?" asked Curdie. "Oh, such a dear, good, kind gentleman," replied the princess. "He speaks so softly, and is so sorry for his dear king. He will be here presently, and you shall see for yourself. You will like him very much." "Has your king father been ill long?" asked Curdie. "A whole year now," she replied. "Did you not know? That's how your mother never got the red petticoat my father promised her. The Lord Chancellor told me that not only Gwyntystorm, but the whole land was mourning over the illness of the good man." Now Curdie himself had not heard a word of his majesty's illness, and had no ground for believing that a single soul in any place he had visited on his journey had heard of it. Moreover, although mention had been made of his majesty again and again in his hearing since he came to Gwyntystorm, never once had he heard an allusion to the state of his health. And now it dawned upon him also that he had never heard the least expression of love to him. But just for the time he thought it better to say nothing on either point. "Does the king wander like this every night?" he asked. "Every night," answered Irene, shaking her head mournfully. "That is why I never go to bed at night. He is better during the day, a little, and then I sleep, in the dressing room there, to be with him in a moment if he should call me. It is so sad he should have only me and not my mamma. A princess is nothing to a queen." "I wish he was like me," said Curdie, "for then I might watch by him at night, and let you go to bed, princess." "Don't you know, then?" returned Irene in wonder. "How was it you came? Ah, you said my grandmother sent you. But I thought you knew that he wanted you." And again she opened wide her blue stars. "Not I," said Curdie, also bewildered, but very glad. "He used to be constantly saying, he was not so ill then as he is now, that he wished he had you about him." "And I never knew it," said Curdie with displeasure. "The master of the horse told papa's own secretary that he had written to the miner general to find you and send you up, but the miner general wrote back to the master of the horse, and he told the secretary, and the secretary told my father, that they had searched every mine in the kingdom and could hear nothing of you. My father gave a great sigh, and said he feared the goblins had got you after all, and your father and mother were dead of grief. And he has never mentioned you since, except when wandering. I cried very much, but one of my grandmother's pigeons with its white wing flashed a message to me through the window one day, and then I knew that my Curdie wasn't eaten by the goblins, for my grandmother wouldn't have taken care of him one time to let him be eaten the next." "Where were you, Curdie, that they couldn't find you?" "We will talk about that another time, when we are not expecting the doctor," said Curdie. As he spoke his eyes fell upon something shining on the table under the lamp. His heart gave a great throb, and he went nearer. Yes, there could be no doubt. It was the same flagon that the butler had filled in the wine cellar. "It looks worse and worse," he said to himself, and went back to Irene, where she stood half dreaming. "When will the doctor be here?" he asked once more, this time hurriedly. The question was answered, not by the princess, but by something which that instant tumbled heavily into the room. Curdie flew toward it in vague terror about Lina. On the floor lay a little round man, puffing and blowing and uttering incoherent language. Curdie thought of his mattock, and ran and laid it aside. "Oh, dear Mr. Kelman!" cried the princess, running up and taking hold of his arm. "I am so sorry." She pulled and pulled, but might almost as well have tried to set up a cannonball. "I hope you have not hurt yourself." "Not at all, not at all," said the doctor, trying to smile and to rise both at once, but finding it impossible to do either. "If he slept on the floor he would be late for breakfast," said Curdie to himself, and held out his hand to help him. But when he took hold of it, Curdie very nearly let him fall again, for what he held was not even a foot. It was the belly of a creeping thing. He managed, however, to hold both his peace and his grasp, and pulled the doctor roughly on his legs, such as they were. "Your Royal Highness has rather a thick mat at the door," said the doctor, putting his palms together. "I hope my awkwardness may not have startled his majesty." While he talked, Curdie went to the door. Lina was not there. The doctor approached the bed. "And how has my beloved king slept tonight?" he asked. "No better," answered Irene, with a mournful shake of her head. "Ah, that is very well," returned the doctor, his fall seeming to have muddled either his words or his meaning. "When we give him his wine, he will be better still." Curdie darted at the flagon and lifted it high, as if he had expected to find it full, but found it empty. "That stupid butler! I heard them say he was drunk," he cried in a loud whisper, and was gliding from the room. "Come here with that flagon, you page!" cried the doctor. Curdie came a few steps toward him with the flagon dangling from his hand, heedless of the gushes that fell noiseless on the thick carpet. "Are you aware, young man," said the doctor, "that it is not every wine can do his majesty the benefit I intend he should derive from my prescription?" "Quite aware, sir," answered Curdie. "The wine for his majesty's use is in the third cask from the corner." "Fly, then," said the doctor, looking satisfied. Curdie stepped outside the curtain and blew an audible breath. No more. Up came Lina, noiseless as a shadow. He showed her the flagon. "The cellar, Lina, go," he said. She galloped away on her soft feet, and Curdie had indeed to fly to keep up with her. Not once did she make even a dubious turn. From the king's gorgeous chamber to the cold cellar they shot. Curdie dashed the wine down the back stair, rinsed the flagon out as he had seen the butler do, filled it from the cask of which he had seen the butler drink, and hastened with it up again to the king's room. The little doctor took it, poured out a full glass, smelt but did not taste it, and set it down. Then he leaned over the bed, shouted in the king's ear, blew upon his eyes, and pinched his arm. Curdie thought he saw him run something bright into it. At last the king half woke. The doctor seized the glass, raised his head, poured the wine down his throat, and let his head fall back on the pillow again. Tenderly wiping his beard, and bidding the princess good night in paternal tones, he then took his leave. Curdie would gladly have driven his pick into his head, but that was not in his commission, and he let him go. The little round man looked very carefully to his feet as he crossed the threshold. "That attentive fellow of a page has removed the mat," he said to himself as he walked along the corridor. "I must remember him." End of section 12. Scene of the Princess and Curdie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lizzie Driver. The Princess and Curdie by George MacDonald. Chapters 20 to 21. Chapter 20. Counterplotting. Curdie was already sufficiently enlightened as to how things were going, to see that he must have the princess of one mind with him, and they must work together. It was clear that among those about the king there was a plot against him. For one thing, they had agreed in a lie concerning himself, and it was plain also that the doctor was working out a design against the health and reason of his majesty, rendering the question of his life a matter of little moment. It was in itself sufficient to justify the worst fears. That the people outside the palace were ignorant of his majesty's condition. He believed those inside it also, the butler excepted, were ignorant of it as well. Doubtless his majesty's counsellors desired to alienate the hearts of his subjects from their sovereign. Curdie's idea was that they intended to kill the king, marry the princess to one of themselves, and found a new dynasty. But whatever their purpose, there was treason in the palace of the worst sort. They were making and keeping the king incapable in order to effect that purpose. The first thing to be seen to, therefore, was that his majesty should neither eat morsel nor drink drop of anything prepared for him in the palace. Could this have been managed without the princess, Curdie would have preferred leaving her in ignorance of the horrors from which he sought to deliver her. He feared also the danger of her knowing betraying itself to the evil eyes about her, but it must be risked, and she had always been a wise child. Another thing was clear to him, that with such traitors no terms of honour were either binding or possible, and that, short of lying, he might use any means to foil them, and he could not doubt that the old princess had sent him expressly to frustrate their plans. While he stood thinking thus with himself, the princess was earnestly watching the king, with looks of childish love and womanly tenderness that went to Curdie's heart. Now and then with a great fan of peacock feathers she would fan him very softly. Now and then, seeing a cloud begin to gather upon the sky of his sleeping face, she would climb upon the bed, and bending to his ear whisper into it, then draw back and watch again, generally to see the cloud disperse. In his deepest slumber the soul of the king lay open to the voice of his child, and that voice had power either to change the aspect of his visions, or, which was better still, to breathe hope into his heart and courage to endure them. Curdie came near and softly called her. "I can't leave papa just yet," she returned in a low voice. "I will wait," said Curdie, "but I want very much to say something." In a few minutes she came to him where he stood under the lamp. "Well, Curdie, what is it?" she said. "Princess," he replied, "I want to tell you that I have found why your grandmother sent me." "Come this way, then," she answered, "where I can see the face of my king." Curdie placed a chair for her in the spot she chose, where she would be near enough to mark any slightest change on her father's countenance, yet where their low-voiced talk would not disturb him. There he sat down beside her and told her all the story, how her grandmother had sent her good pigeon for him, and how she had instructed him, and sent him there without telling him what he had to do. Then he told her what he had discovered of the state of things generally in Gwyntystorm, and especially what he had heard and seen in the palace that night. "Things are in a bad state enough," he said in conclusion. "Lying and selfishness and inhospitality and dishonesty everywhere, and to crown all, they speak with disrespect of the good king, and not a man knows he is ill." "You frighten me dreadfully," said Irene, trembling. "You must be brave for your king's sake," said Curdie. "Indeed I will," she replied, and turned a long loving look upon the beautiful face of her father. "But what is to be done? And how am I to believe such horrible things of Dr. Kilman?" "My dear princess," replied Curdie, "you know nothing of him but his face and his tongue, and they are both false. Either you must beware of him, or you must doubt your grandmother and me, for I tell you by the gift she gave me of testing hands, that this man is a snake. That round body he shows is but the case of a serpent. Perhaps the creature lies there, as in its nest, coiled round and round inside." "Horrible!" said Irene. "Horrible indeed, but we must not try to get rid of horrible things by refusing to look at them, and saying they are not there. Is not your beautiful father sleeping better since he had the wine?" "Yes." "Does he always sleep better after having it?" She reflected an instant. "No, always worse, till tonight," she answered. "Then remember that was the wine I got him, not what the butler drew. Nothing that passes through any hand in this house except yours or mine must henceforth, till he is well, reach his majesty's lips." "But how, dear Curdie?" said the princess, almost crying. "That we must contrive," answered Curdie. "I know how to take care of the wine, but for his food, now we must think." "He hardly takes any," said the princess, with a pathetic shake of her little head, which Curdie had almost learned to look for. "The more need," he replied. "There should be no poison in it." Irene shuddered. "As soon as he has honest food, he will begin to grow better, And you must be just as careful with yourself, Princess," Curdie went on, "for you don't know when they may begin to poison you too." "There's no fear of me. Don't talk about it," said Irene. "The good food, how are we to get it, Curdie? That is the whole question." "I am thinking hard," answered Curdie. "The good food, let me see. Such servants as I saw below are sure to have the best of everything for themselves. I will go and see what I can find on their table." "The chancellor sleeps in the house, and he and the master of the king's horse always have their supper together in a room off the great hall, to the right as you go down the stairs," said Irene. "I would go with you, but I dare not leave my father. Alas! He scarcely ever takes more than a mouthful. I can't think how he lives. And the very thing he would like, and often asks for, a bit of bread, I can hardly ever get for him. Dr. Kellman has forbidden it, and says it is nothing less than poison to him." "Bread at least he shall have," said Curdie, "and that, with the honest wine, will do as well as anything, I do believe. I will go at once and look for some. But I want you to see Lina first, and know her, lest, coming upon her by accident at any time, you should be frightened." "I should like much to see her," said the princess. Warning her not to be startled by her ugliness, he went to the door and called her. She entered, creeping with downcast head, and dragging her tail over the floor behind her. Curdie watched the princess as the frightful creature came nearer and nearer. One shudder went from head to foot, and next instant she stepped to meet her. Lina dropped flat on the floor, and covered her face with two big paws. It went to the heart of the princess. In a moment she was on her knees beside her, stroking her ugly head and patting her all over. "Good dog, dear ugly dog," she said. Lina whimpered. "I believe," said Curdie, "from what your grandmother told me, that Lina is a woman, and that she was naughty, but is now growing good." Lina had lifted her head while Irene was caressing her. Now she dropped it again between her paws, but the princess took it in her hands, and kissed the forehead betwixt the gold green eyes. "Shall I take her with me, or leave her?" asked Curdie. "Leave her, poor dear," said Irene, and Curdie, knowing the way now, went without her. He took his way first to the room the princess had spoken of, and there also were the remains of supper, but neither there nor in the kitchen could he find a scrap of plain, wholesome looking bread. So he returned and told her that as soon as it was light he would go into the city for some, and asked her for a handkerchief to tie it in. If he could not bring it himself, he would send it by Lina, who could keep out of sight better than he, and as soon as all was quiet at night he would come to her again. He also asked her to tell the king that he was in the house. His hope lay in the fact that bakers everywhere go to work early, but it was yet much too early, so he persuaded the princess to lie down, promising to call her if the king should stir. Chapter 21. The Loaf. His Majesty slept very quietly. The dawn had grown almost day, and still Curdie lingered, unwilling to disturb the princess. At last, however, he called her, and she was in the room in a moment. She had slept, she said, and felt quite fresh. Delighted to find her father still asleep, and so peacefully, she pushed her chair close to the bed, and sat down with her hands in her lap. Curdie got his mattock from where he had hidden it behind a great mirror, and went to the cellar, followed by Lina. They took some breakfast with them as they passed through the hall, and as soon as they had eaten it went out the back way. At the mouth of the passage, Curdie seized the rope, drew himself up and pushed away the shutter, and entered the dungeon. Then he swung the end of the rope to Lina, and she caught it in her teeth. When her master said, "Now, Lina," she gave a great spring, and he ran away with the end of the rope as fast as ever he could. And such a spring she had made, that, by the time he had to bear her weight, she was within a few feet of the hole. The instant she got a paw through, she was all through. Apparently their enemies were waiting till hunger should have cowed them, for there was no sign of any attempt having been made to open the door. A blow or two of Curdie's mattock drove the shattered lock clean from it, and telling Lena to wait there till he came back and let no one in, he walked out into the silent street and drew the door to behind him. He could hardly believe it was not yet a whole day since he had been thrown in there with his hands tied at his back. Down the town he went, walking in the middle of the street, that if anyone saw him, he might see he was not afraid, and hesitate to rouse an attack on him. As to the dogs, ever since the death of their two companions, a shadow that looked like a mattock was enough to make them scamper. As soon as he reached the archway of the city, he turned to reconnoitre the baker's shop, and, perceiving no sign of movement, waited there watching for the first. After about an hour the door opened, and the baker's man appeared with a pail in his hand. He went to a pump that stood in the street, and having filled his pail, returned with it to the shop. Curdie stole after him, found the door on the latch, opened it very gently, peeped in, saw nobody, and entered. Remembering perfectly from what shelf the baker's wife had taken the loaf she said was the best, and seeing just one upon it, he seized it, laid the price of it on the counter, and sped softly out and up the street. Once more in the dungeon beside Lena, his first thought was to fasten up the door again, which would have been easy, so many iron fragments of all sorts and sizes lay about. But he bethought himself that if he left it as it was, and they came to find him, they would conclude at once that they had made their escape by it, and would look no farther so as to discover the hole. He therefore merely pushed the door closed, and left it. Then, once more carefully arranging the earth behind the shutter, so that it should again fall with it, he returned to the cellar. And now he had to convey the loaf to the princess. If he could venture to take it himself, well; if not, he would send Lena. He crept to the door of the servants' hall, and found the sleepers beginning to stir. One said it was time to go to bed, another that he would go to the cellar instead, and have a mug of wine to waken him up, while a third challenged a fourth to give him his revenge at some game or other. "Oh, hang your losses!" answered his companion. "You'll soon pick up twice as much about the house, if you but keep your eyes open." Perceiving there would be risks in attempting to pass through, and reflecting that the porters in the great hall would probably be awake also, Curdie went back to the cellar, took Irene's handkerchief with the loaf in it, tied it round Lena's neck, and told her to take it to the princess. Using every shadow and every shelter, Lena slid through the servants like a shapeless terror through a guilty mind, and so, by corridor and great hall, up the stair to the king's chamber. Irene trembled a little when she saw her glide soundless in across the silent dusk of the morning, that filtered through the heavy drapery of the windows. But she recovered herself at once when she saw the bundle about her neck, for it both assured her of Curdie's safety, and gave her hope of her father's. She untied it with joy, and Lena stole away, silent as she had come. Her joy was the greater that the king had waked up a little before, and expressed a desire for food. Not that he felt exactly hungry, he said, and yet he wanted something. If only he might have a piece of nice fresh bread. Irene had no knife, but with eager hands she broke a great piece from the loaf, and poured out a full glass of wine. The king ate and drank, enjoyed the bread and wine very much, and instantly fell asleep again. It was hours before the lazy people brought their breakfast. When it came, Irene crumbled a little about, threw some into the fireplace, and managed to make the tray look just as usual. In the meantime, down below in the cellar, Curdie was lying in the hollow between the upper sides of two of the great casks, the warmest place he could find. Lena was watching. She lay at his feet across the two casks, and did her best so to arrange her huge tail that it should be a warm coverlid for her master. By and by Dr. Kelman called to see his patient, and now that Irene's eyes were opened, she saw clearly enough that he was both annoyed and puzzled at finding his Majesty rather better. He pretended, however, to congratulate him, saying he believed he was quite fit to see the Lord Chamberlain. He wanted his signature to something important, only he must not strain his mind to understand it, whatever it might be. If his Majesty did, he would not be answerable for the consequences. The king said he would see the Lord Chamberlain, and the doctor went. Then Irene gave him more bread and wine, and the king ate and drank, and smiled a feeble smile, the first real one she had seen for many a day. He said he felt much better, and would soon be able to take matters into his own hands again. He had a strange, miserable feeling, he said, that things were going terribly wrong, although he could not tell how. Then the princess told him that Curdie had come, and that at night, when all was quiet, for nobody in the palace must know, he would pay his Majesty a visit. Her great-great-grandmother had sent him, she said. The king looked strangely upon her, but the strange look passed into a smile clearer than the first, and Irene's heart throbbed with delight. Section 13. Of The Princess and Curdie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lizzie Driver. The Princess and Curdie by George MacDonald. Chapters 22 to 23. Chapter 22. The Lord Chamberlain. At noon the Lord Chamberlain appeared. With a long, low bow, and paper in hand, he stepped softly into the room, greeting his Majesty with every appearance of the profoundest respect, and congratulating him on the evident progress he had made. He declared himself sorry to trouble him, but there were certain papers, he said, which required his signature, and therewith drew nearer to the king, who lay looking at him doubtfully. He was a lean, long, yellow man, with a small head, bald over the top, and tufted at the back and about the ears. He had a very thin, prominent, hooked nose, and a quantity of loose skin under his chin, and about the throat, which came craning up out of his neckcloth. His eyes were very small, sharp, and glittering, and looked black as jet. He had hardly enough of a mouth to make a smile with. His left hand held the paper, and the long skinny fingers of his right a pen just dipped in ink. But the king, who for weeks had scarcely known what he did, was today so much himself as to be aware that he was not quite himself, and the moment he saw the paper he resolved that he would not sign without understanding and approving of it. He requested the Lord Chamberlain therefore to read it. His lordship commenced at once, but the difficulties he seemed to encounter, and the fits of stammering that seized him, roused the king's suspicion tenfold. He called to the princess. "I trouble his lordship too much," he said to her. "You can read print well, my child. Let me hear how you can read writing. Take that paper from his lordship's hand, and read it to me from beginning to end, while my lord drinks a glass of my favourite wine, and watches for your blunders." "Pardon me, your Majesty," said the Lord Chamberlain, with as much of a smile as he was able to extemporize, "but it were 1,000 pities to put the attainments of Her Royal Highness to a test altogether too severe. Your Majesty can scarcely with justice expect the very organs of her speech to prove capable of compassing words so long and to her so unintelligible." "I think much of my little princess and her capabilities," returned the king, more and more aroused. "Pray, my lord, permit her to try." "Consider, your majesty, the thing would be altogether without precedent. It would be to make sport of statecraft," said the lord chamberlain. "Perhaps you are right, my lord," answered the king, with more meaning than he intended should be manifest, while to his growing joy he felt new life and power throbbing in heart and brain. "So this morning we shall read no further. I am indeed ill able for business of such weight." "Will your majesty please sign your royal name here?" said the lord chamberlain, preferring the request as a matter of course, and approaching with the feather end of the pen pointed to a spot where there was a great red seal. "Not today, my lord," replied the king. "It is of the greatest importance, your majesty," softly insisted the other. "I descried no such importance in it," said the king. "Your majesty heard but a part." "And I can hear no more today." "I trust your majesty has ground enough in a case of necessity like the present to sign upon the representation of his loyal subject and chamberlain. Or shall I call the lord chancellor?" he added, rising. "There is no need. I have the very highest opinion of your judgment, my lord," answered the king. "That is, with respect to means. We might differ as to ends." The lord chamberlain made yet further attempts at persuasion, but they grew feebler and feebler, and he was at last compelled to retire without having gained his object. And well might his annoyance be keen, for that paper was the king's will, drawn up by the attorney general. Not until they had the king's signature to it was there much use in venturing farther. But his worst sense of discomfiture arose from finding the king with so much capacity left. For the doctor had pledged himself so to weaken his brain that he should be as a child in their hands, incapable of refusing anything requested of him. His lordship began to doubt the doctor's fidelity to the conspiracy. The princess was in high delight. She had not for weeks heard so many words, not to say words of such strength and reason, from her father's lips. Day by day he had been growing weaker and more lethargic. He was so much exhausted, however, after this effort, that he asked for another piece of bread and more wine, and fell fast asleep the moment he had taken them. The lord chamberlain sent in a rage for Dr. Kelman. He came, and while professing himself unable to understand the symptoms described by his lordship, yet pledged himself again that on the morrow the king should do whatever was required of him. The day went on. When his majesty was awake, the princess read to him, one story-book after another, and whatever she read, the king listened as if he had never heard anything so good before, making out in it the wisest meanings. Every now and then he asked for a piece of bread and a little wine, and every time he ate and drank he slept, and every time he woke he seemed better than the last time. The princess bearing her part, the loaf was eaten up and the flagon emptied before night. The butler took the flagon away, and brought it back filled to the brim. But both were thirsty and hungry when Curdie came again. Meantime he and Lina, watching and waking alternately, had plenty of sleep. In the afternoon, peeping from the recess, they saw several of the servants enter hurriedly, one after the other, draw wine, drink it, and steal out. But their business was to take care of the king, not of his cellar, and they let them drink. Also, when the butler came to fill the flagon, they restrained themselves, for the villain's fate was not yet ready for him. He looked terribly frightened, and had brought with him a large candle and a small terrier, which latter indeed threatened to be troublesome, for he went roving and sniffing about until he came to the recess where they were. But as soon as he showed himself, Lina opened her jaws so wide, and glared at him so horribly, that without even uttering a whimper, he tucked his tail between his legs and ran to his master. He was drawing the wicked wine at the moment, and did not see him, else he would doubtless have run too. When supper time approached, Curdie took his place at the door in the servants' hall. But after a long hour's vain watch, he began to fear he should get nothing. There was so much idling about, as well as coming and going, it was hard to bear, chiefly from the attractions of a splendid loaf just fresh out of the oven, which he longed to secure for the king and princess. At length this chance did arrive. He pounced upon the loaf and carried it away, and soon after got hold of a pie. This time, however, both loaf and pie were missed. The cook was called. He declared he had provided both. One of themselves, he said, must have carried them away for some friend outside the palace. Then a housemaid, who had not long been one of them, said she had seen someone like a page running in the direction of the cellar with something in his hands. Instantly all turned upon the pages, accusing them, one after another. All denied, but nobody believed one of them. Where there is no truth, there can be no faith. To the cellar they all set out to look for the missing pie and loaf. Lina heard them coming, as well she might, for they were talking and quarrelling loud, and gave her master warning. They snatched up everything, and got all signs of their presence out at the back door before the servants entered. When they found nothing, they all turned on the chambermaid and accused her, not only of lying against the pages, but of having taken the things herself. Their language and behaviour so disgusted Curdie, who could hear a great part of what passed, and he saw the danger of discovery now so much increased, that he began to devise how best at once to rid the palace of the whole pack of them. That, however, would be a small gain so long as the treacherous officers of state continued in it. They must be first dealt with. A thought came to him, and the longer he looked at it the better he liked it. As soon as the servants were gone, quarrelling and accusing all the way, they returned and finished their supper. Then Curdie, who had long been satisfied that Lina understood almost every word he said, communicated his plan to her, and knew by the wagging of her tail and the flashing of her eyes that she comprehended it. Until they had the king safe through the worst part of the night, however, nothing could be done. They had now merely to go on waiting where they were till the household should be asleep. This waiting and waiting was much the hardest thing Curdie had to do in the whole affair. He took his mattock, and, going again into the long passage, lighted a candle end and proceeded to examine the rock on all sides. But this was not merely to pass the time. He had a reason for it. When he broke the stone in the street, over which the baker fell, its appearance led him to pocket a fragment for further examination. And since then he had satisfied himself that it was the kind of stone in which gold is found, and that the yellow particles in it were pure metal. If such stone existed here in any plenty, he could soon make the king rich and independent of all his ill-conditioned subjects. He was therefore now bent on an examination of the rock. Nor had he been at it long before he was persuaded that there were large quantities of gold in the half crystalline white stone, with its vein of opaque white and of green, of which the rock, so far as he had been able to inspect it, seemed almost entirely to consist. Every piece he broke was spotted with particles and little lumps of a lovely greenish yellow, and that was gold. Hitherto he had worked only in silver, but he had read and heard talk, and knew, therefore, about gold. As soon as he had got the king free of rogues and villains, he would have all the best and most honest miners, with his father at the head of them, to work this rock for the king. It was a great delight to him to use his mattock once more. The time went quickly, and when he left the passage to go to the king's chamber, he had already a good heap of fragments behind the broken door. Chapter 23. Dr. Kellman. As soon as he had reason to hope the way was clear, Curdie ventured softly into the hall, with Lina behind him. There was no one asleep on the bench or floor, but by the fading fire sat a girl weeping. It was the same who had seen him carry off the food, and had been so hardly used for saying so. She opened her eyes when he appeared, but did not seem frightened at him. "I know why you weep," said Curdie, "and I am sorry for you." "It is hard not to be believed just because one speaks the truth," said the girl, "but that seems reason enough with some people. My mother taught me to speak the truth, and took such pains with me that I should find it hard to tell a lie, though I could invent many a story these servants would believe at once, for the truth is a strange thing here, and they don't know it when they see it. Show it them, and they all stare as if it were a wicked lie, and that with the lie yet warm that has just left their own mouths. You are a stranger," she said, and burst out weeping afresh. "But the stranger you are to such a place and such people, the better." "I am the person," said Curdie, "whom you saw carrying the things from the supper table." He showed her the loaf. "If you can trust me, as well as speak the truth, I will trust you. Can you trust me?" She looked at him steadily for a moment. "I can," she answered. "One thing more," said Curdie. "Have you courage as well as truth?" "I think so." "Look my dog in the face, and don't cry out. Come here, Lina." Lina obeyed. The girl looked at her, and laid her hand on Lina's head. "Now I know you are a true woman," said Curdie. "I am come to set things right in this house. Not one of the servants knows I am here. Will you tell them tomorrow morning that, if they do not alter their ways, and give over drinking, and lying, and stealing, and unkindness, they shall, every one of them, be driven from the palace?" "They will not believe me." "Most likely. But will you give them the chance?" "I will." "Then I will be your friend. Wait here till I come again." She looked at him once more in the face, and sat down. When he reached the royal chamber, he found his majesty awake and very anxiously expecting him. He received him with the utmost kindness, and at once, as it were, put himself in his hands by telling him all he knew concerning the state he was in. His voice was feeble, but his eyes were clear, although now and then his words and thoughts seemed to wander. Curdie could not be certain that the cause of their not being intelligible to him did not lie in himself. The king told him that for some years, ever since his queen's death, he had been losing heart over the wickedness of his people. He had tried to make them good, but they got worse and worse. Evil teachers, unknown to him, had crept into the schools. There was a general decay of truth and right principle at least in the city, and as that set the example to the nation, it must spread. The main cause of his illness was the despondency with which the degeneration of his people affected him. He could not sleep, and had terrible dreams, while, to his unspeakable shame and distress, he doubted almost everybody. He had striven against his suspicion, but in vain, and his heart was sore, for his courtiers and counsellors were really kind, only he could not think why none of their ladies came near his princess. The whole country was discontented, he heard, and there were signs of gathering storm outside as well as inside his borders. The master of the horse gave him sad news of the insubordination of the army, and his great white horse was dead, they told him, and his sword had lost its temper. It bent double the last time he tried it. Only, perhaps that was in a dream, and they could not find his shield, and one of his spurs had lost the rowel. Thus the poor king went wandering in a maze of sorrows, some of which were purely imaginary, while others were truer than he understood. He told how thieves came at night and tried to take his crown, so that he never dared let it out of his hands even when he slept, and how every night an evil demon in the shape of his physician came and poured poison down his throat. He knew it to be poison, he said, somehow, although it tasted like wine. Here he stopped, faint with the unusual excitation of talking. Curdie seized the flagon and ran to the wine cellar. In the servants' hall the girl still sat by the fire, waiting for him. As he returned he told her to follow him, and left her at the chamber door until he should rejoin her. When the king had had a little wine, he informed him that he had already discovered certain of his majesty's enemies, and one of the worst of them was the doctor, for it was no other demon than the doctor himself who had been coming every night, and giving him a slow poison. "So," said the king, "then I have not been suspicious enough, for I thought it was but a dream. Is it possible Kelman can be such a wretch? Who then am I to trust?" "Not one in the house except the princess and myself," said Curdie. "I will not go to sleep," said the king. "That would be as bad as taking the poison," said Curdie. "No, no, sire. You must show your confidence by leaving all the watching to me, and doing all the sleeping your majesty can." The king smiled a contented smile, turned on his side, and was presently fast asleep. Then Curdie persuaded the princess also to go to sleep, and telling Lina to watch, went to the housemaid. He asked her if she could inform him which of the council slept in the palace, and show him their rooms. She knew every one of them, she said, and took in the round of all the doors, telling him which slept in each room. He then dismissed her, and returning to the king's chamber, seated himself behind a curtain at the head of the bed, on the side farthest from the king. He told Lina to get under the bed and make no noise. About 1 o'clock the doctor came stealing in. He looked round for the princess, and seeing no one, smiled with satisfaction as he approached the wine where it stood under the lamp. Having partly filled a glass, he took from his pocket a small phial, and filled up the glass from it. The light fell upon his face from above, and Curdie saw the snake in it plainly visible. He had never beheld such an evil countenance. The man hated the king, and delighted in doing him wrong. With the glass in his hand, he drew near the bed, set it down, and began his usual rude rousing of his majesty. Not at once succeeding, he took a lancet from his pocket, and was parting its cover with an involuntary hiss of hate between his closed teeth, when Curdie stooped and whispered to Lina, "Take him by the leg, Lina." She darted noiselessly upon him. With a face of horrible consternation, he gave his leg one tug to free it. The next instant Curdie heard the one scrunch with which she crushed the bone like a stick of celery. He tumbled on the floor with a yell. "Drag him out, Lina," said Curdie. Lina took him by the collar and dragged him out. Her master followed her to direct her, and they left the doctor lying across the lord chamberlain's door, where he gave another horrible yell and fainted. The king had waked at his first cry, and by the time Curdie re-entered, he had got at his sword where it hung from the centre of the tester, had drawn it, and was trying to get out of bed. But when Curdie told him all was well, he lay down again as quietly as a child comforted by his mother from a troubled dream. Curdie went to the door to watch. The doctor's yells had aroused many, but not one had yet ventured to appear. Bells were rung violently, but none were answered, and in a minute or two Curdie had what he was watching for. The door of the lord chamberlain's room opened, and pale with hideous terror, his lordship peeped out. Seeing no one, he advanced a step into the corridor, and tumbled over the doctor. Curdie ran up and held out his hand. He received in it the claw of a bird of prey, vulture or eagle, he could not tell which. His lordship, as soon as he was on his legs, taking him for one of the pages, abused him heartily for not coming sooner, and threatened him with dismissal from the king's service for cowardice and neglect. He began indeed what bade fair to be a sermon on the duties of a page, but catching sight of the man who lay at his door, and seeing it was the doctor, he fell upon Curdie afresh for standing there doing nothing, and ordered him to fetch immediate assistance. Curdie left him, but slipped into the king's chamber, closed and locked the door, and left the rascals to look after each other. Ere long he heard hurrying footsteps, and for a few minutes there was a great muffled tumult of scuffling feet, low voices, and deep groanings. Then all was still again. Irene slept through the whole, so confidently did she rest, knowing Curdie was in her father's room watching over him. End of section 14. Princess and Curdie. This is the LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lizzie Driver. The Princess and Curdie by George MacDonald. Chapters 24 to 25. Chapter 24. The Prophecy. Curdie sat and watched every motion of the sleeping king. All the night, to his ear, the palace lay as quiet as a nursery of healthful children. At sunrise he called the princess. "How has his majesty slept?" were her first words as she entered the room. "Quite quietly," answered Curdie. "That is, since the doctor was got rid of." "How did you manage that?" inquired Irene, and Curdie had to tell all about it. "How terrible!" she said. "Did it not startle the king dreadfully?" "It did rather. I found him getting out of bed, sword in hand." "The brave old man!" cried the princess. "Not so old," said Curdie, "as you will soon see. He went off again in a minute or so, but for a little while he was restless, and once, when he lifted his hand, it came down on the spikes of his crown, and he half waked." "But where is the crown?" cried Irene in sudden terror. "I stroked his hands," answered Curdie, "and took the crown from them, and ever since he has slept quietly, and again smiled in his sleep." "I have never seen him do that," said the princess. "But what have you done with the crown, Curdie?" "Look," said Curdie, moving away from the bedside. Irene followed him, and there, in the middle of the floor, she saw a strange sight. Lina lay at full length, fast asleep, her tail stretched out behind her, and her forelegs before her. Between the two paws meeting in front of it, her nose just touching it behind, glowed and flashed the crown, like a nest of the humming-birds of heaven. Irene gazed and looked up with a smile. "But what if the thief were to come and she not to wake?" she said. "Shall I try her?" And as she spoke she stooped toward the crown. "No, no, no!" cried Curdie, terrified. "She would frighten you out of your wits. I would do it to show you, but she would wake your father. You have no conception with what a roar she would spring at my throat. But you shall see how lightly she wakes the moment I speak to her. Lina!" She was on her feet the same instant, with her great tail sticking out straight behind her, just as it had been lying. "Good dog," said the princess, and patted her head. Lina wagged her tail solemnly, like the boom of an anchored sloop. Irene took the crown and laid it where the king would see it when he woke. "Now, princess," said Curdie, "I must leave you for a few minutes. You must bolt the door, please, and not open it to anyone." Away to the cellar he went with Lina, taking care as they passed through the servants' hall to get her a good breakfast. In about 1 minute she had eaten what he gave her, and looked up in his face. It was not more she wanted, but work. So out of the cellar they went through the passage, and Curdie into the dungeon, where he pulled up Lina, opened the door, let her out, and shut it again behind her. As he reached the door of the king's chamber, Lena was flying out of the gate of Gwyntystorm as fast as her mighty legs could carry her. "What's to come to the wench?" growled the men servants one to another, when the chambermaid appeared among them the next morning. There was something in her face which they could not understand, and did not like. "Are we all dirt?" they said. "What are you thinking about? Have you seen yourself in the glass this morning, miss?" She made no answer. "Do you want to be treated as you deserve, or will you speak, you hussy?" said the first woman cook. "I would fain know what right you have to put on a face like that." "You won't believe me," said the girl. "Of course not. What is it?" "I must tell you, whether you believe me or not," she said. "Of course you must." "It is this, then. If you do not repent of your bad ways, you are all going to be punished, all turned out of the palace together." "A mighty punishment," said the butler. "A good riddance, say I, of the trouble of keeping minxes like you in order. And why, pray, should we be turned out? What have I to repent of now, your holiness?" "That you know best yourself," said the girl. "A pretty piece of insolence! How should I know, forsooth, what a menial like you has got against me? There are people in this house. Oh, I'm not blind to their ways. But every one for himself, say I. Pray, misjudgment, who gave you such an impertinent message to his Majesty's household?" "One who is come to set things right in the king's house." "Right indeed!" cried the butler. But that moment the thought came back to him of the roar he had heard in the cellar, and he turned pale and was silent. The steward took it up next. "Pray, pretty prophetess," he said, attempting to chuck her under the chin, "what have I got to repent of?" "That you know best yourself," said the girl. "You have but to look into your books or your heart." "Can you tell me then what I have to repent of?" said the groom of the chambers. "That you know best yourself," said the girl once more. "The person who told me to tell you said the servants of this house had to repent of thieving and lying and unkindness and drinking, and they will be made to repent of them one way if they don't do it of themselves another." Then arose a great hubbub, for by this time all the servants in the house were gathered about her, and all talked together in towering indignation. "Thieving, indeed!" cried one. "A pretty word in a house where everything is left lying about in a shameless way, tempting poor innocent girls. A house where nobody cares for anything, or has the least respect to the value of property." "I suppose you envy me this brooch of mine," said another. "There was just a half sheet of notepaper about it, not a scrap more, in a drawer that's always open in the writing table in the study. What sort of place is that for a jewel? Can you call it stealing to take a thing from such a place as that? Nobody cared a straw about it. It might as well have been in the dust hole. If it had been locked up, then, to be sure." "Drinking?" said the chief porter with a husky laugh. "And who wouldn't drink when he had the chance? Or who would repent it, except that the drink was gone? Tell me that, Miss Innocence." "Lying?" said a great coarse footman. "I suppose you mean when I told you yesterday you were a pretty girl, when you didn't pout? Lying indeed! Tell us something worth repenting of. Lying is the way of Gwyntystorm. You should have heard Jabez lying to the cook last night. He wanted a sweetbread for his pup, and pretended it was for the princess. Ha ha ha! Unkindness! I wonder who's unkind, going and listening to any stranger against her fellow servants, and then bringing back his wicked words to trouble them," said the oldest and worst of the housemaids. "One of ourselves too! Come, you hypocrite! This is all an invention of yours and your young man's, to take your revenge of us because we found you out in a lie last night. Tell true now, wasn't it the same that stole the loaf and the pie that sent you with the imprudent message?" As she said this, she stepped up to the housemaid and gave her, instead of time to answer, a box on the ear that almost threw her down. And whoever could get at her began to push and bustle and pinch and punch her. "You invite your fate," she said quietly. They fell furiously upon her, and drove her from the hall with kicks and blows, hustled her along the passage, and threw her down the stair to the wine cellar, then locked the door at the top of it, and went back to their breakfast. In the meantime the king and princess had had their bread and wine, and the princess, with Curdie's help, had made the room as tidy as she could. They were terribly neglected by the servants, and now Curdie set himself to interest and amuse the king, and prevent him from thinking too much, in order that he might the sooner think the better. Presently, at his majesty's request, he began from the beginning, and told everything he could recall of his life, about his father and mother and their cottage on the mountain, of the inside of the mountain and the work there, about the goblins and his adventures with them. When he came to finding the princess and her nurse overtaken by the twilight on the mountain, Irene took up her share of the tale, and told all about herself to that point, and then Curdie took it up again, and so they went on, each fitting in the part that the other did not know, thus keeping the hoop of the story running straight. And the king listened with wondering and delighted ears, astonished to find what he could so ill comprehend, yet fitting so well together from the lips of two narrators. At last, with the mission given him by the wonderful princess, and his consequent adventures, Curdie brought up the whole tale to the present moment. Then a silence fell, and Irene and Curdie thought the king was asleep. But he was far from it. He was thinking about many things. After a long pause, he said, "Now at last, my children, I am compelled to believe many things I could not and did not yet understand, things I used to hear, and sometimes see, as often as I visited my mother's home. Once, for instance, I heard my mother say to her father, speaking of me, 'He is a good, honest boy, but he will be an old man before he understands.' And my grandfather answered, 'Keep up your heart, child, my mother will look after him.' I thought often of their words, and the many strange things besides I both heard and saw in that house, but by degrees, because I could not understand them, I gave up thinking of them, and indeed I had almost forgotten them, when you, my child, talking that day about the Queen Irene and her pigeons, and what you had seen in her garret, brought them all back to my mind in a vague mass. But now they keep coming back to me, one by one, every one for itself, and I shall just hold my peace and lie here quite still, and think about them all till I get well again." What he meant by that they could not quite understand, but they saw plainly that already he was better. "Put away my crown," he said. "I am tired of seeing it, and have no more any fear of its safety." They put it away together, withdrew from the bedside, and left him in peace. Chapter 25. The Avengers. There was nothing now to be dreaded from Dr. Kelman, but it made Curdie anxious, as evening drew near, to think that not a soul belonging to the court had been to visit the king, or ask how he did that day. He feared, in some shape or other, a more determined assault. He had provided himself a place in the room to which he might retreat upon approach, and whence he could watch, but not once had he had to betake himself of it. Towards night the king fell asleep. Curdie thought more and more uneasily of the moment when he must again leave them for a little while. Deeper and deeper fell the shadows. No one came to light the lamp. The princess drew her chair close to Curdie. She would rather it were not so dark, she said. She was afraid of something, she could not tell what, nor could she give any reason for her fear, but that all was so dreadfully still. When it had been dark about an hour, Curdie thought Lina might have returned, and reflected that the sooner he went the less danger was there of any assault while he was away. There was more risk of his own presence being discovered, no doubt, but things were now drawing to a crisis, and it must be run. So, telling the princess to lock all the doors of the bedchamber and let no one in, he took his mattock, and with here a run and there a halt under cover, gained the door at the head of the cellar stair in safety. To his surprise he found it locked, and the key was gone. There was no time for deliberation. He felt where the lock was, and dealt it a tremendous blow with his mattock. It needed but a second to dash the door open. Someone laid a hand on his arm. "Who is it?" said Curdie. "I told you they wouldn't believe me, sir," said the housemaid. "I have been here all day." He took her hand and said, "You're a good, brave girl. Now come with me, lest your enemies imprison you again." He took her to the cellar, locked the door, lighted a bit of candle, gave her a little wine, told her to wait there till he came, and went out the back way. Swiftly he swung himself up into the dungeon. Lena had done her part. The place was swarming with creatures, animal forms wilder and more grotesque than ever ramped in nightmare dream. Close by the hole, waiting his coming, her green eyes piercing the gulf below, Lena had but just laid herself down when he appeared. All about the vault and up the slope of the rubbish heap lay and stood and squatted the 49 whose friendship Lena had conquered in the wood. They all came crowding about Curdie. He must get them into the cellar as quickly as ever he could, but when he looked at the size of some of them, he feared it would be a long business to enlarge the hole sufficiently to let them through. At it he rushed, hitting vigorously at the edge with his mattock. At the very first blow came a splash from the water beneath, but ere he could heave a third, a creature like a tapir, only that the grasping point of its proboscis was hard as the steel of Curdie's hammer, pushed him gently aside, making room for another creature with a head like a giant club, which it began banging upon the floor with terrible force and noise. After about a minute of this battery, the tapir came up again, shoved Clubhead aside, and putting its own head into the hole, began gnawing at the side of it with the finger of its nose, in such a fashion that the fragments fell in a continuous gravelly shower into the water. In a few minutes the opening was large enough for the biggest creature among them to get through. Next came the difficulty of letting them down. Some were quite light, but half of them were too heavy for the rope, not to say for his arms. The creatures themselves seemed to be puzzling where or how they were to go. One after another of them came up, looked down through the hole, and drew back. Curdie thought that if he let Lena down, perhaps that would suggest something. Possibly they did not see the opening on the other side. He did so, and Lena stood lighting up the entrance of the passage with her gleaming eyes. One by one the creatures looked down again, and one by one they drew back, each standing aside to glance at the next, as if to say, "Now you have a look." At last it came to the turn of the serpent with the long body, the 4 short legs behind, and the little wings before. No sooner had he poked his head through, than he poked it farther through, and farther yet, until there was little more than his legs left in the dungeon. By that time he had got his head and neck well into the passage beside Lena. Then his legs gave a great waddle and spring, and he tumbled himself, far as there was betwixt them, heels over head into the passage. "That is all very well for you, Mr. Leg-serpent," thought Curdie to himself, "but what is to be done with the rest?" He had hardly time to think it, however, before the creature's head appeared again through the floor. He caught hold of the bar of iron to which Curdie's rope was tied, and settling it securely across the narrowest part of the irregular opening, held fast to it with his teeth. It was plain to Curdie, from the universal hardness among them, that they must all, at one time or another, have been creatures of the mines. He saw at once what this one was after. The beast had planted his feet firmly upon the floor of the passage, and stretched his long body up and across the chasm to serve as a bridge for the rest. Curdie mounted instantly upon his neck, threw his arms round him as far as they would go, and slid down in ease and safety, the bridge just bending a little as his weight glided over it. But he thought some of the creatures would try the leg-serpent's teeth. One by one the oddities followed, and slid down in safety. When they seemed to be all landed, he counted them. There were but 48. Up the rope again he went, and found one which had been afraid to trust himself to the bridge, and no wonder, for he had neither legs, nor head, nor arms, nor tail. He was just a round thing, about a foot in diameter, with a nose and mouth and eyes on one side of the ball. He had made his journey by rolling as swiftly as the fleetest of them could run. The back of the leg-serpent not being flat, he could not quite trust himself to roll straight and not drop into the gulf. Curdie took him in his arms, and the moment he looked down through the hole, the bridge made itself again, and he slid into the passage in safety, with Ball Body in his bosom. He ran first to the cellar to warn the girl not to be frightened at the avengers of wickedness. Then he called to Lina to bring in her friends. One after another they came trooping in, till the cellar seemed full of them. The housemaid regarded them without fear. "Sir," she said, "there is one of the pages I don't take to be a bad fellow." "Then keep him near you," said Curdie. "And now can you show me a way to the king's chamber, not through the servants' hall?" "There is a way through the chamber of the colonel of the guard," she answered, "but he is ill and in bed." "Take me that way," said Curdie. By many ups and downs, and windings and turnings, she brought him to a dimly lighted room, where lay an elderly man asleep. His arm was outside the coverlid, and Curdie gave his hand a hurried grasp as he went by. His heart beat for joy, for he had found a good, honest, human hand. "I suppose that is why he is ill," he said to himself. It was now close upon supper time, and when the girl stopped at the door of the king's chamber, he told her to go and give the servants one warning more. "Say the messenger sent you," he said. "I will be with you very soon." The king was still asleep. Curdie talked to the princess for a few minutes, told her not to be frightened whatever noises she heard, only to keep the door locked till he came, and left her. Section 15